Startups begin in communities across the country.
Why does Silicon Valley get so much credit? My name is Nick Kastner.
And I'm Caitlin Clays. We're interviewing the people building startup communities across America.
But in the areas no one is talking about, the middle.
This is the Ecosystem Builder Podcast by Mug.News.
This is Nick Kastner, and I'm here with Meg Steuer. Meg is an ecosystem builder from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Meg, thank you so much for joining the show.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me, Nick.
Yes, yeah. So to kind of kick things off, Meg, how did you first get involved in your startup community?
That's a great question. I was actually working in southern Minnesota doing some small business consulting through the Small Business Development Center as I was getting my MBA. So working sort of around the startup community, but a lot more with traditional Main Street businesses, ran a program for the state of Minnesota for minority-owned businesses, and really started to become passionate about startup communities and this idea of startups and small business really being a fuel for the broader economy and economic development more broadly. So after I finished up my MBA and finished up with some of that work in southern Minnesota, I moved up to Minneapolis, St. Paul, just to be in a more urban area, and very quickly got connected with Twin Cities Startup Week through a friend of a friend, which I think is how it goes in the startup community. Someone knows someone. And so I started working with Twin Cities Startup Week, which is our big annual festival and celebration of startups. So we host over 250 events each year. It's grown. I think this was its seventh year this year, which happened all virtually. 2020, I'm confused always now about what year we're in, with 2020 as a very different year. But through that work was introduced to a group that was forming what is now Forge North and the program that I manage. And so this idea of, we had Twin Cities Startup Week and a lot of big events, but what was happening all day, all year, 365 days a year, in support of our startups. And a lot of that comes down to this true ecosystem building role and creating a community in which startups can thrive outside of the big events and the big executions. And so sort of worked my way into this role in meeting all of those folks. And I'm thrilled to be here. I've been in this role now for just coming up on 3 years. And I look back at 3 years ago and how much our community has changed and how much more is happening. And it's just really incredible to see. So I'm thrilled to have been on this journey and be in the role I am in now as the manager of Forge North.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, Meg. So when you were assigned to, extend the ecosystem building beyond that one event, what were some of the first things that you guys applied to your community?
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So what we really looked at, we did a survey of the community in partnership with Beta, which is the group that runs Twin Cities Startup Week. And we really said, what needs to be done and where can we only work together? And that was the big focus for our group, was to say, what can not one group do, but that we can only do in community. And so we focused a lot on, how do we set big goals for our community and really look at, what does 10 years from now look like in our startup community? How can we focus on a data-driven approach? So this survey that we did, how do we really ground ourselves in measuring our progress towards those big dreams? How can we celebrate more proudly? So looking at marketing and some of that work that needs to happen between and sort of at the intersections of some of our other accelerator groups and programs and co-working spaces, and then focused a lot around racial equity. So we started with sort of some of those core areas. We did a lot of traveling in those first few years to see other startup communities, to show up at conferences, did a lot with the eShip network. And so that was where it started. And it's grown significantly over the last 3 years. And now we're focused on racial equity, engaging our corporate community, and increasing the number of investments into early stage startups. So a little bit of a shift, but still along those same lines of where we started.
Yes, yeah, and it's good to hear. It's important. There's so much that you could focus on when building a community, that it's interesting to hear the handful of things that you all honed in on. And of course, one thing 2020 highlighted is the need and importance of focusing on racial equity. So it's great to hear about your work on that front. All right, so Meg, I have spent little time in Minneapolis. So what's one thing about Minneapolis's startup community that I may not know outside looking in?
Yeah. So we really, when we started our marketing efforts, we did a lot of surveying of our community, had a lot of conversations, worked with a really great agency here locally called Zeus Jones to figure out what was that differentiator of our community. And I think oftentimes you hear the first answer being, we're really close to corporate headquarters. So we've grown over 50 Fortune 500 companies here in Minneapolis, St. Paul. We have 16 that are currently headquartered here and lots of others with North American HQs or big sort of talent pools. But what we talk about most often, and I think what resonates most with startups themselves, is this problem-solving nature. And so we really care about the problems our companies are solving versus, trying to make a quick buck or, growing the next unicorn. And sometimes to our detriment that we almost care too much about the problem. And so you see less of that churn in our community. So we actually top the list in terms of 5-year survivability rates. And we really attribute that to the fact that people here in Minnesota, we vote at the highest rates, we give at the highest rates, we volunteer at the highest rates. And so a lot of our startup founders are solving problems that not only are in support of their own communities, but really in support of global challenges that need to be solved. And oftentimes those take longer to work towards and to work on. But also we see really passionate founders that stick with their company longer than we see in other regions because of that mentality of starting with the problem, really working at solving it and being in it for the long term.
Yes, yeah. So when you guys, or when your team goes and engages with the corporations to form some sort of partnership, and I sort of forgot all the corporate headquarters located in Minneapolis. Like Target would be is that probably the big
So we've got Target, Best Buy, 3M, Medtronic. You look at United Healthcare Group. So we have the largest healthcare insurer in Mayo. So Rochester, Minnesota. We have the world's best hospital system. So really a wide variety across healthcare, retail, enterprise technology. So we have a lot of like fintech. You look at US Bank, Allianz has their North American headquarters here. And then also food and ag. So we've got General Mills, Cargill, a lot of the other big players in the food space.
Yeah, and you just listed some of the biggest companies in America. When you go to engage with them, how do you start that? How do you begin that relationship?
That's something we're still working on. And so we actually last fall did what we're calling an audit of our enterprise community. So we did interviews with 32 different companies to better understand how they're currently engaging with our startup community, how they'd like to engage with our startup community, and where they're struggling. And so we're looking forward to this year coming out with some more of that data and really talking about how we can be doing that better. But what we see right now is that there's a variety of ways folks engage. One is through a traditional mergers and acquisitions model. So they're looking to get connected with startups to acquire those startups. The second is through direct investment. So looking at a CVC arm or actually doing corporate venturing where they're investing in startups, whether that be for monetary returns or for strategic positioning where they're investing based on their innovation needs. Then we see a lot of folks now looking at the accelerator model. So we have Securian and Allianz Life are co-sponsors of our on-ramp insurance accelerator. So again, specifically focused strategically in their industry vertical, but they're supporters of that. Cargill and Ecolab are co-sponsors of a Techstars program, specifically focused on food and ag tech. So we see that as another really great opportunity where it's a structured program. They're able to make that investment, learn what it looks like to partner with startups through the Techstars model before they take on something internally. And then the other, I'd say sort of core opportunity is to really support the startup community more broadly. So we see a lot of investment in things like Twin Cities Startup Week, other accelerator programs, and that's coming through corporate social responsibility arms, through marketing dollars, and sort of some different channels outside of your traditional corporate innovation department. So we see that as sort of the spectrum. There's a lot of opportunities in between. One area we're really working on to think about is this idea of vendors and partnerships and procurement as a way that we can really support startups in getting better connected and having better education in how to sell to a large corporation. And so that's one area I think we're also hearing a lot of conversation around, diversity in the procurement process and in vendor management. So that'll be another area we talk about a lot this year, I think.
Yes, interesting, Meg. So whenever we go in to look at a new ecosystem, we always find it interesting to kind of know where the entrepreneurs are are hanging out, whether that be co-working spaces or coffee shops. That said, we are in a pandemic, and both coffee shops and co-working spaces have been hit really, really hard. But even like before the pandemic, and then it seems like we're near the end of the pandemic, fingers crossed. So as the pandemic breaks, what are those spaces that the entrepreneurs tend to hang out in?
Yeah, so we're really lucky here in Minneapolis, St. Paul. We span 2 cities, we span a river. And so we actually have a lot of spaces made available to entrepreneurs in that we don't have one central sort of downtown location. We've got a variety of them. And so we have a strong presence. Fueled Collective was sort of the first local co-working spaces here in Minneapolis, St. Paul. They have 5 locations and provide a great opportunity for entrepreneurs to get connected. They're located, one of their main locations is downtown Minneapolis in the Grain Exchange building. So you actually get to walk in. It's a beautiful space. You get to see what that old grain exchange looked like. So they've been here a long time doing a lot of really great work. And then we've seen over the last 5 years a bunch of other players come to town. So we've seen the national players in WeWork show up in a variety of spaces, but we've also seen folks like the Coven who have specifically built a space for female and female identifying founders. And for anyone in the community. So not specifically for startups, but for anyone that's looking for a space to build and create and build community. And so they've done a really incredible job. They have 2 spaces and just recently made a move from downtown Minneapolis to Uptown, which is a space south of Minneapolis. But we're seeing this shift in where are people spending time as we go through this pandemic. Folks aren't downtown. Folks are closer to their homes in whatever community that is. So the Coven has been really great in both creating physical space, but also doing a significant amount of programming. They took their business model virtual at the beginning of the pandemic in 24 hours, shut their doors and came up with a virtual model, doubled their membership, and have just offered incredible programming over the course of the year. And we've seen that across the board. We have Impact Hub here locally, which is for our social ventures. We have a great community around the University of Minnesota that's starting to build out these small innovation hubs of folks looking at things like smart city development and how do we think about startups, our community, a university setting. And so we're really seeing an expansion of this work in a lot of different sectors. And so I'm cross my fingers, hoping that we will be able to be spending time physically with one another in those spaces soon. But to your point, we also have a really wonderful cafe community, lots of really wonderful coffee shops. And we have a great community of breweries and tap rooms. And so oftentimes outside of those actual workspaces, you see a ton of folks in those breweries and cafes, having meetings and doing things like that. And then as you cross the river into St. Paul, we have Osborne 370, which was the old Ecolabs headquarters, which has been turned into what I'll call an innovation space. And so it houses our TechStars program, Lunar Startups, which is accelerator program for BIPOC women and LGBTQ founders. And then a bunch of other programs and startups who have taken floors of that building in downtown St. Paul. So that I think is becoming sort of our St. Paul innovation hub. And again, we were doing tons of events there and haven't been there recently, but looking forward to hopefully this year.
Yes, yeah, fingers crossed. All that's fascinating, Meg. Is there one, I guess, like centralized place, like a website or a blog for people to learn more about all of these different programs and events and everything happening?
Yeah, so we actually worked with dozens of partners in 2019 to build what we're calling our Startup Resource Compass. And so that's on forgenorth.com/resource compass. And we're doing some actually really fun updates to our website as we speak. So over the next few weeks, folks will be seeing things change there, but we have over 570 resources listed. So that's accelerator programs, co-working spaces, grant or investment opportunities, really specific to industry opportunities. If you need a community kitchen, if you're in the food and ag space, or if you need somewhere to do clinical trials in the healthcare space, really trying to create a one-stop shop where you can go and find those resources and trying our hardest to get you an email to an actual person. So making it, a quicker connection than we were seeing in the past where you were Googling and maybe ending up on 5 or 6 different websites and then filling out contact forms. So I also act in my role as Forge North manager as a front door. So if folks are on that compass and thinking, oh boy, I still don't know where to go, or I'm a little bit overwhelmed, I take a lot of calls, and we have some other great partners that support us in doing that through some office hours opportunities where we can help you get connected to the right thing if you're still unsure.
Yes, yeah, that like all of that is incredibly valuable. Just like having it all on one page is helpful, but then also the like primary contact. So nice work. All right, Meg. So who or what is one of the most successful startups from Minneapolis? And I know as an ecosystem builder, you may have a long list, but if you could just highlight a few that have both started and then scaled in Minneapolis.
Oh, this is a great question. And to your point, as an ecosystem builder, I never want to pick just a few. But I think I can point to Jamf because they IPO'd this year.
Oh.
And so you look at some of those bigger folks that we're now seeing exit in the Minneapolis St. Paul community. And I think we're talking a lot about how important those exits are to one, having some dollars that come back to both the founders and our local investors to reinvest in sort of the future of our Minneapolis St. Paul ecosystem. And then you see some other really great companies that are still scaling. I look at Upsy, which is a warranty-based service. So if anyone's looking for warranties for your iPhones or computers, and they're really, thinking about how do we reimagine some of those retail software offerings. So they did one of the first Techstars in partnership with Target retail accelerators. And so I think, we think a lot about here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, that intersection of a lot of our industries. So you're looking at insurance, you're looking at retail, and you have the professional network and the expertise here to build something really great at the intersection of those industries. And I think that's where we see a lot of our success. And then I look at, some of our smaller and more up and coming companies, and Anila with Habit Aware comes to mind. She is a really great example of someone that chose to be in Minneapolis, St. Paul. So she and her husband moved here and really found that this was a place they could work hard, but also find balance in raising their family and having access to parks and great education. And so they chose to build here. She's built think of a Fitbit, but to monitor repetitive behavior for folks that have sort of stress-induced behaviors. And so really great technology. Times listed on their list of best inventions. That was 2019 now. Again, I need to skip back 2 years in some of these things that I haven't kept track of in 2020 as well. But she is someone that has taken advantage of a significant amount of programming here in the region, a significant amount of mentorship. She was a winner of Minnesota Cup. We have the largest statewide business plan competition run out of the University of Minnesota for any company doing under $1 million in revenue. So she was a winner there as well, is part of a lot of our different networks. And I think is a really great example of how our community supports entrepreneurs along the way across a variety of different models and types of resources.
Yeah, fascinating. How about the venture capital scene? Are there a bunch of players, or because traditionally the Midwest lacks both the dollars and firms and the players in the venture capital scene? What's it like in Minneapolis?
It's coming along. So we definitely have seen more activity in these last 3 to 5 years. It's our goal over the next 3 years. So by 2023, to see the number of companies getting funding here in Minnesota double. So we see about 110 companies receive funding every year. We'd like to see that be about 225. Part of the problem sometimes is our tracking of those numbers. We don't always brag about ourselves when we get that first round of funding. So we're trying to do a better job of benchmarking and tracking. And really our investors have been a great support in that work. So we have been convening a roundtable of early stage investors for about 2 years now. That group has been managed by Mary Grove and Brett Brohl, now with Bread and Butter Ventures. So they recently just started a fund together, but have great representation from a number of firms. We recently did a meet and greet with them in February, and 17 of them joined a Zoom call to just share who they are, what fund they're with, what their fund is investing in. And so we're seeing a lot more of that public facing support for startups to say, hey, let's have you better understand who we are, what we're investing in, so that we can be in better communication with one another. So we have significantly more active funds and firms here. We have a few firms that are raising new funds, which is really exciting for us. So we saw Great North Labs out of St. Cloud raise another big fund for Midwestern investment late last year. Or early last year, again with the years. And we're seeing now just a significant increase in, deal flow between those folks. So since they're talking more, we're seeing more of that collaboration. And we just had the announcement of Groove Capital's first round of funding, and they are focused on being sort of Minnesota's first check fund. And so really focused on how do we get folks from that family and friends round or, the crowdfunding campaign to their first sort of institutional investment. And so we've seen that be a big gap here in Minnesota for a long time. And so excited to have folks stepping into that space to help folks get to our active investors that are a little bit further along.
Yes, yeah, all that's really exciting, and it's exciting to hear the growth and the goals and again just everything you're working on in the venture capital space. How about media outlets that help tell stories of startups happening in Minneapolis and St. Paul? And by media we count podcasts, blogs, the traditional like old media outlets. What's the scene like for that as it relates to startups?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. We're currently working behind the scenes, similar to our resource compass. We want to put together a really great list of just the storytellers. So, sort of starting to include podcasts as a resource in terms of you really understanding what's happening in our local community. The first one I'll mention is Tech.mn. And so they span both the startup community and then the technologist community. We have a bunch of really big headquarters here that have great technologists on their teams working internally. And so Tech.mn tries to sort of bridge that gap. And so they're telling a lot of great stories via articles. They have a podcast now that comes out weekly. They just rebranded that. So they actually have 2 podcasts. So we see a lot of really great stuff coming from them. We also have Mini-Inno, which is part of the Inno network run by the business journals across the country. So that's another great source. And then we have some smaller folks that are doing really great work. And so we've got a lot of podcasts coming out of our accelerator programs where they're helping share the stories of their cohorts. So Lunar Startups has a podcast. There's just a lot of really great things. We also have, NPR and a lot of really great media sort of presence in the local ecosystem. And so we just see a lot of really great storytelling happening. I think as we look at the pandemic and last year, we saw, an uptick in podcasting, but also in recorded events. And so I think in addition to what we've seen as traditional media, and to your point, we have the Star Tribune and a lot of great other traditional media sources doing a lot of coverage. But I think what we saw is folks put more time and intentionality into, if we're going to host an event that shares a really great story or shares really great educational content, let's think about how we record that and how we can provide that as evergreen content. So our friends at Ministar do monthly AMAs. And it can be everything from, let's talk about the pandemic to let's talk about a specific type of software development. But having that type of content as what now I guess we would consider media versus that being an hour where people showed up in a physical space and then left and nothing existed after the fact. I think we're really looking at that as something we want to be leveraging this year as we do go back in person, but having a lot of this evergreen media content across a variety of different sort of ways and mediums to be thinking about for new entrepreneurs. How do we not forget about that? Because there is so much incredible content as you're sort of stepping into the startup community here in Minneapolis, St. Paul that we have to share.
Yes, yeah, I've spent a bunch of time thinking of what events look like beyond the pandemic, and that it seems like there'll definitely always be a virtual component. That if you're not able to show up, you'll still be able to consume the content, which is just very, very exciting.
I agree. And I think it's done such wonders. We are the metro-based hub for Launch Minnesota, which is our statewide program in support of startups and innovation. So they have hubs all across the state. And what we've learned through these virtual events where the content is available to anyone, anywhere, is that we can have so much more connectivity and be better advocates for our startups in saying, hey, let's not all host the same event 7 different times in 7 different regions. Let's focus on hosting a really great event once, providing that content, and then maybe having regional conversations about that topic, or really thinking about how we leverage these opportunities that technology has provided us in terms of access in a virtual world.
Yes, yeah, spot on, Meg. So here's my last question for you. If I were to move to Minneapolis or St. Paul tomorrow and wanted to start a business, what's the very first thing I should do?
Well, I would say call me, because I would love to get you connected with the right person. We hope that there are folks that are interested in this region. And again, I think I say call me not because I want to be the bottleneck in talking with everyone, but we have such a wealth of knowledge in this community. We have so many people that we sort of say are green lighted to always have a coffee, that really want to be helpful in getting you connected. And I think what we've learned is that I'll meet folks a year and a half into their time here in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and they'll be saying, I still feel like I haven't met the right person. And it's because they were going to events or doing networking. And what we hope to do as the Forge North Network, and I sort of act as the front door to that, is to say, hey, let's talk to you and let's get you set up with the 5 right people that will know the next person that you need to talk to. And so I do that in partnership with dozens of partners and our Launch Minnesota network to really be thinking more intentionally about, if you're going to be here, if you want to start something, what's the most important thing in terms of your next step? Is it the stage of your business? Is it the industry your business is within? Is it how you identify? Do you want a space built for veteran entrepreneurs? Well, let's get you hooked up with Bunker Labs. Do you want a space built specifically for female entrepreneurs? Let's find you those resources that are best suited for you, because like I said, we have 570 resources that just we've listed. And so making sure you find the right one based on what's most important to you. And whether that be calling me or calling anyone in our community, encouraging folks to reach out, be intentional about asking for help. Here in Minnesota, we will provide that help. And so really, that's, I think, the biggest thing. If you want to be here, there's opportunities for partnership, and folks will typically take the coffee and make connections for you.
Yes, yeah. Well, all of this has been fascinating, and I feel like I need to make a trip to Minnesota here soon just to check out the community.
We're ready to have you anytime. You might want to wait a few months. Like I said, we have a lot of breweries and tap rooms, but it's a bit chilly this time of year to be sitting outside with our COVID precautions. I will say it's like 45 degrees out today, so springtime, you might still find an opportunity, but lots of great stuff to do outside, and also lots of great stuff to do in the winter. We have cold winters, but lots of lakes, lots of cross-country skiing. So anytime you want to be here, we're happy to host.
Amazing. Well, thank you for the invite, and thank you for taking the time to join us here today, Meg.
Yeah, thanks so much, Nick.
Now that we've learned about an ecosystem from a person who's building it, I'm going to link back up with Nick to clarify on some jargon and take a deeper dive into this ecosystem.
What is up, Nick? How was your conversation with Meg?
Hello, Caitlin. It is great to see you. So yeah, conversation with Meg was amazing. And she is from Minneapolis. I know you're from Wisconsin. Have you ever spent much time in Minneapolis or St. Paul?
Yeah, I was born in Minnesota. So I've spent plenty of time in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Love it.
Yeah, hot damn. Well, I have actually never been there. And it's kind of one of those like cities in the Midwest where I would like to spend some time. And probably my biggest takeaway was I forget about all the corporate headquarters in Minneapolis, like from Target to what's the 3M or two very big ones, but Meg kind of went down the list, and it was I guess just a good reminder of like how their economy works, but then also like them putting so much effort into the startup corporate partnerships. It's just like really fascinating to hear, and I am interested to just continue to watch that community grow over the next few years.
Mm-hmm. The Orpheum Theater, that was always a big thing for my birthday. My mom would take me to the theater up there. And so I really recommend, Nick, when you go there, definitely check out what they have, because there's always a theater show that I know, like, even if you don't like theater, there's always one that you would like.
Yes. Yeah. So I wonder what the term Orpheum means, because there's also an Orpheum Theater in Omaha. Do you know what it means? Is it like a name that someone?
Yeah, I don't know the meaning, and I should. I was a theater minor. So.
Yeah. Yes. I wonder if it's like a Rockefeller type of, like, the one family give a bunch of money for theaters. And Emmy, my girlfriend, is a huge theater, like musical theater person. So I've slowly kind of got into it. We'll have to take a road trip, especially Meg mentioned that in the winter it gets so damn cold, and she was pushing me. I do love to ski, and mainly skiing, but going to Minnesota when it's so freaking cold in the winter seems like a tough play. But sometime in the summer, a post-pandemic summer it sounds amazing in Minnesota.
Absolutely. 100% agree. I've made it a thing that I'm like, I'll visit the Midwest in the summertime. Otherwise, I'll stick to Texas.
Yeah. Yes, definitely feel that.
Well, kind of getting into it, why don't you tell me a couple takeaways that you have?
Yeah, so those were kind of the big ones. And then also, like when we ask a lot of times when we ask about like media outlets or resources a community has, those resources tend to be scattered. But Meg and her team have done a bunch of work to put those all like on a landing page on their organization's website and start to kind of pool those resources together, which is just super convenient for someone like us or a new entrepreneur moving to the community. It just makes it easier to kind of like get a lay of the land and not have to do too much work to get all the information needed.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure you've probably found this, like, I know I have the Google search, like, of course, like the internet is great with all these resources, but wow, does it get overwhelming. So it's really cool to hear that there is a space that, that's helping you out a little bit more. So that's like really cool to hear more about. So jargon wise, did you have anything you needed to look up?
Yeah, so there, as far as specific jargon, no. She did mention a bunch of websites throughout the interview, and I kind of hit on, I kind of just like landed on the page to see the different, mainly media outlets and podcasts. And there's a bunch of, she said there's a lot of the local accelerators have podcasts that feature the companies that go through the program. So I gave a first glance at all of those, and it's just cool to see that type of organization getting into the podcasting space. But as far as like looking up definitions, I did not have to with Meg.
Mm-hmm. Well, then my last question, do you have any final thoughts before we part?
Any final thoughts? I guess my only one would be, she talked a lot about like including or adding the focus of diversity and inclusion into their team's I guess radar for the next, like they're focusing on that for the next few years, and that is wonderful to hear. And that should be on everyone's radar regardless of the industry you work in. But we could all do better, so it's great to hear them working for that goal. Caitlin, do you want to read us out?
Yeah, definitely. I do want to say I've really enjoyed, like, I've been stoked to see the few like past episodes. We've really leaned into the diversity, equity, and inclusion. A lot of our ecosystem builder people have really like expressed what they're doing to help out. So I just wanted to like make that observation and say, like, I'm excited to continue this process and learn more about it.
Yes, I have an interview tomorrow that I'm excited for it. So we will, it'll be one in a few weeks. So something to stay tuned for.
All right. Well, I'll go ahead and take us out.
Perfect.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Ecosystem Builder podcast, which is a product of Mug.News and hosted by Nick Kastner and Caitlin Clays. If you have any questions about today's episode, connect with us on Twitter at Nick Kastner, at Clays Creates, or at Mug News Official. If you've enjoyed the episode, please leave a review and share with your friends. We release episodes every Wednesday morning, so make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a beat.